Another specifically and integrally Russian pedagogical idea is the idea of intonation. When we talk about intonation on the piano, we're not talking about whether the piano is in tune or not, as we would be if we were talking about violin, but intonation in the Russian pedagogical tradition has to do with recognizing the contour, the shape of a line. So steps and leaps. So we address a half step differently than we do a whole step. We address a major sixth differently than we do that minor second. I think the minor second is really the one that's hardest to imagine, because let's say we're at a fountain, and it's in the middle of a staircase. I think in Rome or something, there might be a situation where there's a step here, a step here, but it might be a little rounded here, so we might actually be able to figure out what moving a half step feels like to our feet. But in other words, it's not a firm step, it is actually sort of a sidling thing. That can also suggest to us whether it should be a more close legato, sort of in a leading tone situation where we're yearning to reconnect with the tonic, or it can be an emphatic, less connected thing. But yes, let's talk first about our first examination of the range of possibility within one notation. We'll talk about the staccato dot. Pianists are taught articulation primarily as a binary concept. It's either long or short, legato or staccato. But there are gradations. A dot over a dash implies short but not too short. I propose even within one staccato dot there is ambiguity, possibility. If I saw a staccato eighth note in a piece by Stravinsky or Prokofiev, I'd ask, how short do you want it? I had, friends of mine, Edgar Meyer and Carter Gray. Carter's a cellist, Edgar's a great bass player. And we would be on the road, and they would have a competition. Who could play the shortest note? It's like, Carter would get the rosin out. It's just fantastic. The shortness, and that's the Stravinsky Prokofiev thing. If, however, we were talking to my friend and longtime principal flutist at the Berlin Philharmonic, Sir James Galway, and if he saw a staccato eighth note, let's say in a Beethoven symphony, he would respond from the traditional definition of staccato. Does anybody know what the traditional definition of staccato is? Like, let's say we've got a staccato eighth note. How short is it? In Berlin, chapter and verse. Anybody? Staccato denotes half the printed length. So right there, we have, we're splitting the atom all of a sudden, because we have on the one end of the spectrum that how short can you play this idea of staccato, and on the other end of it, in relative terms, the difference between that, 384th note staccato, and half an eighth note, that's a 16th note. That's pretty languid. That's pretty remarkable. That's a very big range of possibility. Between these two views of the same notation, there is, if not a capacious range, certainly a discernible range of possibility. We can apply that new type of shading in a group of notes marked identically staccato, or in any event, if not specifically notated as staccato, our tendency would be naturally to point to the short end of the binary scale. We are able to create a sense of direction, a phrase arc starting with the shortest value and perhaps gathering duration to a more potentially lyric Berlin-style length. We'll talk about this Mozart. I'll get back to Bach in a moment, but I found this one to be my favorite example. This is from Mozart's last piano concerto, and I'm going to be talking mostly about these pickup eighths. I'm thinking still lyrically. I'm coming out of this. But these guys, I think, right? You think so? I mean, it's just kind of a bracing, sort of wakeful, sort of thing. Now you hear what I'm doing. I'm starting short and getting longer, right? And then even more the second. So I think I'm probably only finally doing a full eighth note, maybe on that last one. But you can hear how I'm making a palpable difference there. And it's extraordinarily important because my attention wanders constantly. That when I see identical patterns, my first thought is, how do I make this difference? And there's no point in making it a strictly dynamic enterprise because there are so many different possibilities with other notational parameters, in particular this articulated one, that I think it's extraordinarily important. Now, just to show you though, that my thinking has actually changed in the last year. I love this might be my favorite view. So you hear how I'm starting out a little short and getting longer, right? And I think that's a good way to do it. As a matter of fact, I used sort of the same strategy in the G minor, which has a bunch of repeated notes. So here's the problem is when we get to the harpsichord, that slight differentiation of touch doesn't quite read. I mean, in particular, when we are in a stretto situation where the theme, the motive, is being repeated. And I found that particularly on the harpsichord, this really wasn't reading, this gradual thing. So I go back to my whole idea of making a palpable and a discernible relationship between each two notes. So, and that made it much more transparent on the harpsichord, because rather than trying to create a continuum of lengthening, I'm actually looking at it much more in terms of so connecting those two, and then making each two-note group an integral part. And when you treat it that way in the stretti, it's much clearer. You can hear that, right? So I love my idea, but I think it works better on the Mozart concerto. And with the G minor, I came up with an even better idea. Because instead of doing a continuous crescendo articulatedly, I always take every opportunity to play with, to explore the duality between binary and tertiary rhythm, between 2 and 3. And so anytime you see 3/4 in Bach or 6/8 in Bach, anytime you can find the hemiola in there, it's always a great thing. I'm always I'm wonderfully aware of where we are in the bar, where we are on the stressed notes, the stressed beats or not. But here, we're in 3/4, but I'm going to take the opportunity and make a play for a 6/8 moment. So in other words, instead of doing it that way, we go back to our old idea of having very specific relationships between each two notes, or in this case, throwing over into a complete embrace of a 6/8 moment instead of a 3/4 song. that kicks up a lot of nice and fun notes.